What does the pause look like? Is it a breakup? Can we do it while we're in relationship? So what are different ways that people can hold this sacred pause chapter?
Beginning step is like, this isn't working for us. This is a no. And the way that it's headed and the way it's directed, like, you're not happy, I'm not happy, we're not moving forward into more love and more connection. So let's hit the pause button on this. And this can look like many different things. This could like reading a book together and doing the work together in those ways, like going through each chapter. This can look like hiring a therapist, especially if you're in a relationship, to be like, hey, let's look at some of our stuff together so that we can move past this conflict. And sometimes you've tried all of the things with all of the different people and practitioners, and it might be time to explore intentional separation of like, for 3 months, we're going to separate. I've seen this play out so many different ways, but it can be an intentional like separation, or it can be like a breakup. If we're at that point in the relationship where it's like both people aren't in agreement of moving forward, then maybe the breakup is the best, most loving option for you both at that time. And then you would enter into a sacred pause as somebody who's single to heal and work through these patterns and dynamics.
The one caveat I'll add, if you're in a relationship and you're really doing what you're saying, which is like same patterns, same da-da-da, then we know that there's a deeper thing going on. Because when we build the skill sets, we're able to use conflict as a way to deepen intimacy and understanding, and actually deepen commitment and deepen trust. So the first thing you have to do is say that our intention of this pause is not to end the relationship or commit to staying together. It's to actually be in service of what is true for both of us. Because if we're trying to orient to either one of those outcomes, which it might be very true at the beginning of a pause that you want to leave. It might be very true at the beginning of the pause you want to stay. But it's actually being with those truths and being able to bring them forward that the relationship ends up being liberated. Because so many of the times, like, people, they haven't brought that truth forward till it's like the end, you know, and women initiate divorce far more than men. And it usually takes about 2 years from the time that there's a complaint or something's brought forward that they actually leave. But by the time they leave, they're generally done, you know, so there's not actually any chance to repair. But I would say most couples, especially if they're no longer having intimacy, there's a lot of friction, there is an opportunity to break through to a whole other level. What we don't face, we repeat. Sometimes there's so much contempt or like pain in a relationship that it is easier to confront these patterns with someone else. And that's just a truth. I don't want to, sometimes I'm like resistant to say things like that because, you know, people are like, work through everything. And it's like, no, like sometimes that's our wound, is that we stay through everything, you know? And I see that time and time again when you talk about staying or fighting for something, the people who always fight and stay too long and believe there's something wrong with them. They're just like, if I just do more, they'll change. And it's like, actually do less. Like, actually, you need to do less. That's your job, is to chill and let them show up. Because if you take up space from people moving towards you, they can't step towards you. So part of the growth of a chaser is to stop. And really, I would say the dance between two people is always about space, not about each other. One person relates to space when there's too much of it, they cling. And the other one, when there's not enough of it, they run. And so it's really when we can start thinking about how our nervous system feels in relationship to space. That's how we start to heal too, is building trust in relationship to showing up for one another.
How did you guys navigate the sacred pause? Because you guys had an intentional ending. It was really interesting, Kai, like listening to what you were navigating in that space of like, okay, I have this impulse to want to connect. I don't want to lose him forever. Like all of those moments of, oh shit, did I make the right choice? How should I do this? How should I do that? Because I think that's the first thing that's going to hit everyone, is that like, oh my gosh, wait, hold on, let's roll this back. How did you guys navigate that pause?
Yeah, well, I entered into an intentional container for 3 months where it was no dating, no seeking, no sexting, and no stalking, no reaching out to Mark, no conversation or communication with men. And the reason I did that is because I had that conversation with Mark Wolin, the author of It Didn't Start With You. And he was like, listen, Kai, he's like, based off of your patterning, if you don't do this work and heal, like at the core level of your nervous system, I will be having this same conversation with you in 2 years. I took it very seriously, where I was like, okay, I better enter into this intentional healing dynamic and really explore my relationship to the masculine and to men specifically, because even underneath my conscious awareness, I didn't realize how much of my energy was orienting towards men and how much I was sourcing validation, safety, security, my identity from them, from even like the male gaze. I mean, I talk about it in the book, but there was like a funny moment during the container where I realized I was going to a certain spin class to get the attention of the male instructor.
You thirst trapper, you.
Like, and it was like one of those moments where I was like, oh my gosh, this is so deep. I was
that
like,
extra bop on that bike.
Who am I? I without the male gaze. And then not to mention like my deep fear of being alone, of being in aloneness with myself. Like I had never touched or explored that level of aloneness before. So it kicked up a lot of fears for me, which we talk about in the book, and how I navigated that. Well, I was in a container which was guided. So I did have a mentor who was supporting me through that 3-month journey so that I could actually reach out and share like what I was going through. And then I also made an agreement with my girlfriend at the time, where I was like, every single time I get reactive, or not reactive, but activated in my nervous system, and I want to reach out to Mark, can I reach out to you instead? Can I like redirect that energy into another place that is more supportive for me in my healing journey? And yeah, I used it quite a few times at the very beginning because my nervous system was just really dysregulated by the whole container of removing men and the masculine from my life in those intentional ways. And then, yeah, that fear that one day popped up while I was in the container, and I actually broke my own container. That's how strong the fear was like, I'm going to lose him forever, so I better reach out. And that fear just took the steering wheel and was like, we're reaching out. We're breaking every single commitment you have to yourself. And that one really shook me to my core. That's when I realized of like, wow, this is the deepest work I've ever done, because I can't believe I would break my own word. But it was like, I came out the other side of that container so fierce in my standards, so fierce in everything that I desired in life. And I was no longer going to tolerate anything less than that.
Yeah, it was kind of like we met in that mutual ferocity, because when we broke up, I was done. I was like, I was so done with ambivalence. I was done, like any hint of her ambivalence, I'm like, out. But I was walking forward very clear that what I was creating was what I was creating. Because I trusted myself so much that I left someone I loved so much who could not fully choose it, that moving forward, I was like, I had no doubt I would meet someone and create a life. That there was no not knowing, because all I know I needed was someone who had a mutual sense of curiosity, responsibility, orientation to growth, and similar, values.
We were no longer sourcing safety, security, identity, validation from one another. That's the kicker.
Very famous psychotherapist, he talks about how the reason that couples end or quote unquote fail is because they fail to make good agreements at the start, like clear agreements. And that's what containers are, is they're agreements.
So how did you guys know that it was time to enter into relationship 2.0?
It just like dropped in. It was like, you know what? I really think there's more here for us. Like for me, a lot of my life is guided by spirit and soul. So I listen to whenever I'm being guided. And I was like, you know what? I think there's more for Mark and I want to explore it. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, do you want to explore this together? And he was like, yeah, let's talk about it. And so we didn't just jump in back into relationship 2.0. We created, because we're obsessed with containers, if you can't tell by now, we created a dating container. So it was a 3-month dating container where we lived into the questions, what is the best, highest, most loving form of our relationship? Is it friendship? Is it business? Is it romantic? Or is it to separate and just like let each other walk our own paths? And so we lived into those questions for 3 months with a few other agreements in place where we were exclusively seeing just each other. I was not financially sourcing anything from Mark, so he wasn't paying for anything. That was a big hook in our previous relational dynamic. So we're like aware of that. Like, let's not fall into that trap again. No penetrative sex, because hormones are real and sex can complicate or muddy things. And actually, one of the ways that a lot of us deal with our dysregulated nervous systems is through sex. We soothe our nervous system through sex. And it's like, no, actually, you should be having the hard conversations you need to be having in order to create internal safety so that you can go deeper in sex. So we removed that. And yeah, we just made a commitment to like continually telling each other the truth. And we constantly explored what was actually coming up for us both in that container so that we could arrive at a full body yes for both of us.
And if we can just honor the truth and not be attached to, do we have to be together at the end of this, then will the natural byproduct of truth, which led us to ending, will it be in service of the relationship deepening? And it was. So I think that's true for most people.
So powerful. The work you guys are doing, putting out into the world is so powerful, so needed. It really is a guiding light in this world in this time.